Hello everyone, this is a review of WarBonds Battle for Vitoria, the Apprentice Rules edition of the game. The publisher and designer actually kindly offered me a review copy, but as you shall see in here, that has in no way affected my review of the game. So let's dive right in to what I think about this game. First of all, I like heavy and complex games. I like war games. I like fantasy games. I like counterinsurgency games. I like all those things. I play chess. I like all of that. And that's why when I was offered the chance to review WarBonds Battle for Vitoria by Juste Jonny from Punk Studios, I thought it might be a good idea. I did ask for the smaller version of the game, which is this Apprentice Rules, but as you can see, it's still a pretty big game with a pretty large amount of stuff in it. It comes with this Plano box full of stuff that you have to get into, and it has a about 2 by 2.5 board, and then another like 1 by 1.5 board that I'll get, and we'll look at that in a second. But this is a big game, and typically I try to review games that I think I'm going to like. Now I might be showing my hand here, but this game just didn't quite make it, although for Juste Jonny's sake and for the sake of doing the review, I'm going to follow through with what I said I was going to do. By doing this review, I'm not going to do a bunch of beautiful shots on this game or anything like that. First of all, because it's kind of hard to, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But second, because I had trouble getting people to agree to play this game. You'll see, and you'll see probably in the way other people talk about the game, the base rule book is like 40-some pages, and then each player has a player guide that is on top of that. Now, that's not necessarily a problem for a game that is straightforward, but this rule book, and here you can see that it has the leaders, and then you have different units that you can access in the game. It is just overwhelming with how much information there is. I tried to get in several sessions before I review something. I wasn't able to do that a whole lot. I played the some, but it didn't make the cut for a few reasons. First of all, the game is a lot to learn. Second, as I stated earlier, when I started to write my review from this game, I realized that my review didn't just feel like a review of the game, but it felt more like a review of the process used to create the game, which is a little bit odd for me to say. That feels weird to me. I'm going to try to keep the review short, but the game itself didn't feel to appeal to people when I showed them. I'm not sure it was the game, but rather how the game presented itself. I think there's a good game here. I can tell there's tons of work put into it. I can tell that there's a lot of heart and passion in that DIY spirit that punk music is known for and punk ethos. But with all that, I would like to highlight the fact that what I've said and written elsewhere, a game shouldn't just feel like work. There should always be a point where the game feels like a game and there's joy to it, and I didn't ever reach that with this. That doesn't mean that a game doesn't have work or it doesn't have a process to it, or that it's not difficult. I just feel like there should be a joy in that process of discovery and finding out what play is happening and how you can get better at something. I didn't see that coming to fruition. I could see maybe where that would come from hours and hours and hours spent in this game, but I personally wasn't invested enough to feel like I wanted to continue that process, which says a lot in and of itself, considering I've done that for several other games. But there should be a certain amount of joy and discovery as that process goes along, and there's this vague line where the presentation of the game continually felt more like work in this game. And specifically for a game that has so much information and you can get overloaded on. And this is supposed to be the kind of light version of the game. That seems a little bit problematic. One thing I should note is the thing that is missing in this game. There's two parts that are kind of missing compared to the bigger version. Is first of all, there would be more units usually. Second of all, you would use gold to deploy your units. You're not doing that here, so there's nothing really driving that in this version of the game, which is an odd thing to take out, I think. And then finally, you also don't have the settlements in this version of the game, which makes it simpler on one level, but really it misses the mark of what is lacking in simplicity in the game, and that is the clarity of how the rules are presented, the clarity of how to jump into the game. I want to be able to get in a game like this fairly quickly and learn as I grow. That's part of the beauty of a game like Gloomhaven, for example, that is the work of one person, and the vision of one person, really, who not just the work of one person, who brought on so many others to help them create something that does so well at communicating its message without adding too many layers of complexity as it communicates that message. This just feels like I'm being piled on all the time. For example, when I go to find out how to deploy units, I have to go to a different section where I had to search for that a little bit more than it should have been the case, especially given that that seems like a basic mechanic of the game. This is not an indication of Juste Jonny's work or the appeal that this game could have or anything like that. It's just the fact that something is off about the presentation, and that's could be disheartening to the creator, but that's not who I'm necessarily writing this review for. This review is for people who might be interested in the game. We'll talk about who might be interested in this game, or especially if the game gets another iteration, because as I understand it, and maybe I'm wrong here, this game is still in somewhat of a development process, given that the rules that I have say that they're alpha edition. So maybe that means that there's going to be a beta edition of the game, that there is more work to be done here. That would be cool to see, because I think there really is a game here. All right, so here is a setup for 2 players where we have a first player camp and a second player camp, and maybe first player has picked Tengus the Unchained, which honestly has some of the funnest artwork just in terms of his axes here. So we have things like he is Chaos Evil, he's got a health, he's got an initiative order amount, and these are all... There's just a lot of information here. Basically, he can do +1 damage on all 5 of his attacks. And this person is the first player just because they picked the first character. Now, there's a giant chart for this that I will hopefully have here in the video. But if not, for all of the gameplay, you can look up Juste Jonny has a video for just about everything. And there's just tons and tons of videos that he's made, which go through all this ad nauseum. But there is all this information on here for the Warlord leader. It tells you everything. You put their... I don't even remember the name right now, but you put their character chit here, but you also have an initiative chit that goes over here based on their initiative number, which is also shown here on here. And so this is just an example, and this is Vagabond Goliar Alebreath, but this person only has number 1 on their initiative instead of 8. You do that. As units come out in the game, basically there's this idea that they float up. And here's where I would like to point out this idea of terms doing things that are unique to this game is not a good idea. There's so many terms like floating up the initiative track that are just different than anything I've seen, and different isn't necessarily good in this case because it's borrowing ideas that are similar to other war games, but it's not using the same terms. And as those things come up, when you are trying to teach someone a game or you're bringing a game to people that's new, the idea that you're just going to have this new thing of floating up an initiative track, or the attacks per turn APT, or battle attack damage, that you're just inventing your new terms and acronyms. This adds to the confusion because nobody remembers acronyms, especially if you're just referring to the acronyms at first until they get used to a system. And this isn't a system that is directly borrowing from other war games in terms of what it is saying, although the meaning is often the same. Anyway, again, like I mentioned before, we have basic land types here. We in the master version of the game, there's additional land types, but we have land. We also even have, we can make these floating land types, which are kind of not floating. These are again, I forget what it calls them, but you can go into the sky and have things that are elevated, and so you put this clear marker out there, allows this to be in the sky, and then you have things that are above the board. I'm not going to do all that right now. But as you can see, you can't see very well. I have this, my camera is about 2 feet above the map here. And here is a player aid card. Way too much information on this amount of card because this is like a, I don't know, 7, 8 point font. It's got 2 sides to it. Universal abilities, ability rules. Okay, that's fine, I guess, unless you have a hard time reading something like this, which a lot of people do, and you're definitely not going to be able to play this where there's low light. And then you have information that's on here, plus you have information on units, and each one of these units, and I understand why you did this, because you have to be able to track both where they are on the board, but also where they are on the initiative track. They have both a generic name, so like this is Runic Protectors Eager, but they also have a specific, let's go with this one since I actually grabbed this one. We have Runic Protectors Agitated. So we have one that goes on our initiative table. So this one would like go to 3 because there's nobody else there. And then we have the Runic Protectors Agitated, and that is disabled because it's just been deployed. But look how much information is there. Unless I have it, let's see here, like this, to where it's like, okay, so that's about a foot from my camera. So unless it's about a foot from your face, you can't see that because there is this tiny little 3.4 point font on there that is, I'm not going to get into the technical details of it, but like it's just not very readable. And so imagine a bunch of these out here and a little bit lower light. I have full bright light on this right now, like daytime light on this. But imagine you didn't. What are you going to be able to see with what's going on the board? I can't. I'm 18 inches from that, and I can't see it very well. Plus, you have symbols here, 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 and here. And that's part of the problem with the cognitive overload that goes on with this game is that not only are you trying to parse the rules, but you're trying to parse what is out on the board state at the same time. And that's why I decided I didn't want to keep putting time into the game, and I was ready to write this review rather than keep going into rules and rules and rules. And that doesn't even deal with the fact that there's a whole nother set of rules just for dueling. But as you can see, there's a lot going on here. A lot of thought has been put into this. There's a dragon that goes through here as the game progresses. We have an initiative table. We have our war camps, unit recall, rules and events that go on. All this goes on. There's battling. Battling is pretty simple. You just end up putting a damage out on somebody, and unless there's some kind of modifier, it's just a single damage for a regular thing. In that sense, it is chess. But my question would be, why would I want to play something that says that is without randomness if I know that this guy isn't good against this guy in battle? Isn't it just a matter of picking the right things fast enough that have already been figured out for me by someone else? That doesn't seem to be like chess. That seems to be more like somebody already figured out all these complicated systems, and then I'm playing a procedural game based on that. So just to show you a little bit more of this rule book and why I usually don't go to rule books and talk about them in a review, but it's just pages of information where there are very few times that you actually get to see a nicely done example. Like here's an example talking about targeting range, but it doesn't really walk you through that in anything but text. So the example's here, and then all the text about what is happening is next to it. Which can be fine, but when it's over and over again, it feels like just cognitive overload, like I mentioned before. So that's the rule book. You get a little taste of that, and then same sort of thing is happening here. But imagine this. This is just again for the apprentice version, but imagine this on the the larger, you open this up and right away, instead of seeing something that is, okay, here is something easily summarizing, here's a long table of lists. I mean, this was part of my problem. I really, really enjoyed the Imperium games, but that rule book could have been written better in a similar way. This just takes that to another level of, here's information overload. Really cool ideas, some really fun artwork. I like that. I like the simplicity of the modifiers and the attacks and range and things like that, but it's not presented in a way that helps someone get into it. I mean, the Wandering Spirits, that's pretty cool artwork. I like that. Oh, more things where it distills your information quickly would be helpful, instead of all these charts that are just the same information as a list. That's one thing that I struggle with this game. So I think that's everything that we want to see here, because, well, you get the idea. I gave you the general idea of how the game goes and all that, but I want to talk about a couple other things too. In the book, it feels like a little bit of micromanagement. Like, there are rules given for banker and unit ID piece handler and unit reference card handler. Someone telling me that I need to do that rather than just offering it as a suggestion feels like the type of hand-holding that tells me that somebody wants me to play the game exactly as they intended and no other way, which is weird to say, right? Like, I'm somebody who thinks that games are created the way they are and have the rules they have for a reason. Like, they don't work unless you follow those rules. And then lots of times people complain if they don't follow those rules or they didn't read them all or whatever. That's not what I'm saying here. The organization and the presentation feels like somebody forcing you into certain slots and ways of thinking about their game. That doesn't feel fun to me. And as a side, it's this type of micromanagement feeling that there's minutia that end up, all that minutia, it ends up feeling tedious. And I mean this quite literally. Every single unit piece is tiny and somewhat inscrutable. We just took a look at them. And due to too much text and icons that are just hard to decipher, it feels, due to all that, it just feels continually overwhelming. Gameplay is 2 to 5 players. There's a common map. Each player selects a warlord and sets up in the order they selected. I also forgot to mention that you also can only play units that go along with your alignment. That feels thematic. That feels fun. But the fact that it's hard, again, to see those things, that's hard. When I was younger, I played in a couple of bands, and they had very DIY aesthetics. This game takes that full force all the way on. You can tell Juste Jonny has put in lots of work, but he's also touched everything in the game, almost to the point that it seems like there's nobody to say no. Sometimes that can create a stunning work. Like I already mentioned Gloomhaven and now Frosthaven. Isaac Childress did that. But being a visionary is a little bit different than micromanaging, and that's the way this feels. This is a heavy game that won't have the broad appeal that Gloomhaven and Frosthaven has, at least at this point, until the presentation gets cleaned up. The focus on DIY has created a barrier between effort and final output. The rulebook, player guides, and pieces all need an outside voice that really says what works and what doesn't work. The tendency of a creator is going to be, and I get this, but the tendency of a creator is going to be to put so much work into this that what does a reviewer like me know? What does someone else know? I put hours, hundreds and hundreds of hours into this game. How would someone else know? And they're right. Sure, fine. You don't have to listen to me, but is this going to accomplish what Juste Jonny wants to accomplish? Is it going to bring in the types of players he wants? I doubt it. I'm open to being wrong, but I doubt it because I personally feel like the presentation is just off. I don't think that this is going to connect with people, touch people in the same way that something like Gloomhaven does. Not because of some commercial thing, but because this feels like I'm being told, how to play, how to think, how to approach this world, which is the opposite of what I would want in a fantasy war game. The rulebook, player guides, and pieces all need somebody to chime in and say, hey, that works, that doesn't. And I hope Juste Jonny hears this criticism and applies it. Like I've said several times in this video, there is a game here, and I think it really, really could be good. I just don't think it's there yet. And finally, onto this thing about randomness. I have my own issues with the game about battles not having randomness, and I get that there's chess, but again, there's already chess. And like, what's the point? Like, with the other game, I will play with people who don't know what they're doing. But in this game, I would never want to play with people who don't know what they're doing. And in fact, I would never want to play this game with people who haven't spent a couple of hours researching how to play and understanding how to play beforehand, because I think it'd be a waste of their time, especially because, and I haven't even mentioned this yet, when you are out in this game, you're out for the rest of the game, so you could be out early on if some people decided to pick on you a little bit, and then that's just it. You're there, you came over for a game day, and the game day is over. So for a game that ostensibly has no randomness, there is a huge player bias here. So this isn't like a fantasy simulation. It's more like a complex abstraction of wits. And maybe that's your thing. Maybe reading tables and reading a book that is just dense text is something that appeals to you in a game. Maybe you'll really like this. It just doesn't appeal to me. And the real problem with all this is that the game only rewards those who know the ins and outs completely. You have to have people who enjoy the game, know how to play it in order to have a decent game going. I don't know how it would be rewarding to beat somebody who doesn't understand what they're doing in this in the first place. There are many games that have ways of catching up. This doesn't have that. And this leads to a chicken and egg situation, as the rulebook and the piling on of constant work and cross-reference keeps people from wanting to dive in more to this, I think. The joy which comes from realization and abstract concepts just isn't rewarded fast enough here. It's that calculus of time spent plus effort plus how much fun am I having. That came up in the negative for me. For the players who can't immediately grasp a bunch of different tables without having to reference anything, you won't like this. But if you can get that grasp, you'll like this against equally matched players who have figured out which ones are just X versus Y, where X and Y are equal outputs, and you can just outthink your opponent. This game rewards long hours of study and note-taking and coming back to it over and over again. And for certain people, this sounds perfect. I'm sure that there is an audience for this, because the rise and fall of your army totally depends on your choices and your ability to stay focused. It just falls a little bit flat for me. Thanks to Juste Jonny and Punk the Studios for my review copy. I hope this isn't the last we see of this realm, Vitoria, because there is a lot here. There is some really cool stuff going on. Let me know what you think of the game, though, and your thoughts on the game. Maybe I'm wrong. Either way, happy gaming, and we'll catch you later.